For those of you who don't know me, I'm Helen Spence-Jackson and I work for EIT Climate Kick. We're one of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology supported KICs, focusing on climate innovation in our case. We're a public-private partnership. We bring together large and small companies as well as research institutes, universities, students, startups, public authorities, city authorities, and essentially we're here to try and operationalize innovation on the ground. So that isn't just in terms of technological innovation, it's also in terms of everything that's connected to do with systems innovation, so behavioral change, policy and regulation initiatives, as well as the shiny technological side of things too. And from hearing the speakers so far, I'm inspired to just give a small little taste of some of the work that we do, which is particularly around at the moment looking at retrofits and specifically around a mission that we're currently trying to build around retrofitting of homes. It's projects around retrofit have existed for a long time, but what we see is that you don't often get the scale. So we've set ourselves a challenge of trying to get 1 million homes retrofitted by 2023, working with 100 different cities. And at the moment, I'm very conscious of the fact that renovation is a fantastic way of trying to bring the energy transition into the individual living space. And that actually is something that I'm sure is going to help us identify some of the barriers that are actually existing. And that's what this focus of this panel is around, overcoming the barriers to the investments that are required for tomorrow's energy, clean energy and energy efficiency. Now, it's June. I can feel the exams in the air, even though they're long past for me. But I'm going to start with a little quick, rapid-fire question to each of my panelists and try and keep the conversation moving along quite rapidly. And then I'm going to come back for one follow-up question to each of you. So as a kickoff, as a starting point, I would like to ask each of you in turn, just in a few words, as few words as you can, what do you see as the key barriers to the investments that we need to be addressing? Starting just going across in this order.
Okay, I start. So,
and feel free to introduce your
name.
Good
afternoon,
as well,
everybody. I'm Adil Gamal. I'm the Secretary General of the European Energy Research Alliance, which is basically the grouping of about 250 research organizations, universities active in low carbon energy technology, and probably the most influential and biggest global energy research grouping. So the 3 points, sense of urgency is for me by far the biggest, the most important one. I think it gets me very angry when I hear politicians still speaking about 1.5 degrees. I think this is not anymore about optimism, it's about true lie. We are currently on track to go to 3.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, and the Paris pledges are bringing us above 3 degrees Celsius. So it's really about avoiding the climate chaos. And I think in that respect, we need to consider very different approaches than the one we are using today, and probably nonlinear approaches. The second one is about relevant valuation of externalities, and this involves a lot of things. Certainly generalized carbon tax and availability of appropriate financial instruments, but also it's about, I think, the historical responsibility of governments to properly channel the funding to low carbon research and deployment. Just to give you an idea, and I think we had the figure of 50 billion over 10 years by Peter Sweatman. Just in 2.5 years, into 2008, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, the EU 28 governments paid directly citizens' money in the amount of 1,400 billion euros to bail out the financial system. This represents 70 years of the public research in low carbon technologies globally. 70 years. I think end point is about investment in information and education. I think only if people understand their relationship to energy and how their behavior really affect the emissions will we be able to achieve significant reduction of emissions at the scale that we need.
Okay, thank you. Bettina,
Thank you. Bettina Dorndorf. I'm working in KfW, German state-owned promotional bank, as Senior Product Manager and Sustainability Manager. We had a business volume of 75.5 billion euros in 2018, of which almost 2/3 were dedicated to domestic promotion, roughly 20 billion euros dedicated to finance energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is one of our key topics to be addressed with the promotion. Answering the question of the three main barriers to overcome, I will give you an answer from the specific perspective of a promotional bank looking into energy efficiency investments in the building spectrum. And I actually interviewed my colleagues who are in touch with our customers looking into improving and developing our promotional programs. And this is what they said. So the first barrier has to do with the mindset. There is actually a lack of awareness as regards the energetic status quo of a private building or real estate, and a lack of awareness of the options to increase energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is not in the heads of people, and this is actually linking to what you said, education and understanding the impact of the personal acting. Second one has to do with affordability. There is a lack of affordability, in particular in economically weaker regions. Although there is a broad range of promotional support available, loans and grants, however, there is still the need to invest equity. And the savings to bear with the additional cost for measures in the building sphere is not always available. So people just lack the funds to do the necessary investment. And the third one has to do with the degree of attractiveness of promotional schemes. So existing public support measures apparently are not attractive enough to massively scale up energy efficiency investments. I think I wanted to highlight these three barriers.
Thank you very much. Moving over to you, Barry.
Thank you very much. So I think the first thing which isn't a barrier, from my perspective, is actually finance. So Knauf Energy Solutions is a spin-off company that was created from Knauf Insulation. We are 6 weeks old, so we've just started. But our ambition is to support the renovation of the building stock and to deliver real high-performance new build as a company. And what we see in terms of project development and our customers is finance isn't their first big problem, right? The first big problem is this constant energy efficiency focus on barriers. I don't think that is, it's interesting when you think about the big energy companies and they talk about exploring like offshore gas or doing a major offshore wind farm. They don't talk about barriers, right? They look about the long-term profit that's available. They look at the feed-in tariffs, or they look at the long-term power purchase agreements which are on offer. And like real companies, they figure out how to solve the problem. They manage the training, they manage the communication, they make it happen, because at the end of the day, there's a huge opportunity. And I think the biggest problem for energy efficiency, certainly in the building sector, is that we don't have those project development companies that exist. And one of the reasons we don't is because we've never been able to meter energy efficiency the way that power generation is able to meter power generation. So it's very easy for a major company who's going to go out and build a large offshore power plant to say, if you guarantee me 12 cents a kilowatt hour for 25 years, I will solve all the problems, right? I will get it done, I will get financed. But we haven't done that for energy efficiency. The thing that Knauf Energy Solutions has done is we've invented a digital technology which allows us to, for the first time ever, meter energy efficiency in the same way that you can meter power generation. And that changes everything. Because now, to the person who has 40,000 houses, you know what you can do? You can ask government to give you the same kind of incentives that they gave renewables, that they gave other people, they gave nuclear, they gave everyone else, a number of kilowatts per saved energy. And you can use that to access long-term financing, to create the projects and to deliver the projects, so we actually get serious and we actually go from the 1% to the 3%. So I think that to me is that's what has to change completely, right? We need total innovation in policy. We need to go to the same policy that worked for renewables, the same policy that worked for the first time that we had carbon in the environment, right? The same policy that we had for nuclear the first time we had nuclear, to really make this work. And with the technological change that we've now brought to the market, it is for the first time possible to incentivize energy efficiency in the same way that we do power generation. And with that, I think we can fundamentally change this market, but we need policymakers to do that, and the rest of the barriers are gone.
Okay, we'll come back to that in the next round. Thomas?
Yeah, 3 challenges. Businesses, citizens, and system. Businesses, building on what you said, if I have to be oversimplistic and take a metaphor from the animal world, most businesses in the energy sector behave like pussycats rather than behaving like tigers. They're very fearful of change, and that needs to change. And therefore, the sense of urgency and all the policy discussions we're having about climate neutral economy by 2050 can be helpful in that regard to make them understand that the right way forward for them is to change drastically and evolve from a pussycat to a tiger. The second is on citizens. I'm tired of hearing the word citizen acceptance and acceptability. When you look at many cases of innovation, in many instances, the technology is developed in a vacuum, and then we ask sociologists, social scientists about social acceptability of something that has already been developed. And basically, we ask them to, we treat citizens in a way, here again, being oversimplistic, like people in France treat goose when it comes to making foie gras. Basically making sure that the goose, accepts the treatment that is supplied to the goose. What needs to happen, and what is happening in a lot of innovative companies actually, is to talk about the user experience during the process of innovation and making sure that the technology, the business model, the marketing benefits from the early user experience and therefore allow citizens not to accept, but to take ownership and to participate in the transition. Otherwise, we will never get as fast to where we need to be. And the third point is about system. What we are talking about is a system change. We need to drastically change the way we move, the way we heat, the way we produce, the way we consume. And therefore, everything that we do needs to be embedded into that. And this is not the case. For instance, many policies currently in Europe about housing are about building new houses in places that are currently cheap. And you can build the most energy efficient building you want. You build that very far away from any kind of mode of transportation. And people need to do 50, 100, 150 kilometers just to go to work, just to go to the tribunal, just to go to the supermarket. So we need to have this system thinking. So for instance, when it comes to renovation, one of those is also about making sure that we take the transport dimension into consideration.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to carry on with you for the next round while you're on a roll there. So we've seen from the NECP reports coming out today that many member states have got quite considerable amounts of work to do. How can we leverage public money to accelerate innovation in a way that's going to be constructive in this area?
Well, first, public money is not only about national governments. Regional governments and local governments are also very, very, very important when it comes to innovation. Let's address the elephant in the room. For 20 years now, almost, the European Union and the member states have said, we commit to research and innovation, and we will increase, that's the so-called Lisbon agenda, and we will increase research and development innovation spending up to 3% of the GDP from both public and private research and development. This has not happened. This figure has decreased or slightly increased over the past 20 years, and the main reason for that are finance ministries and budgets. When you want to spend more at the national level, but also at the European level, and when you want to increase the research and innovation budget, obviously the people handling the research and innovation ministry are all in favor, but the finance minister and the budget minister are against. And then it comes to the policy making, the policy decision about what do you prioritize. What the European can do first is to lead by example, and therefore increasing the European budget for research and innovation is paramount. The EU will have no credibility if it asks member states to increase research and innovation if the EU does not do that itself. The Commission proposal therefore goes in the very, very right direction, and I hope the policymakers at the EU level will get a deal done on that. So that's the first element, and the second element is what under Horizon Europe is called strategic planning, and how do you make sure that the EU priorities are co-designed together with the member states to make sure that this national public money will also feed into and will be leveraged by the EU budget. And finally, missions are very important, but I think here again it needs to be a mission about a system change. And therefore, rather than talking about just energy efficiency in buildings, if we make sure that 100 cities become carbon neutral by 2030, that's system change at the local level, because that's not only buildings, but that also transport, agriculture, energy production, etc. And there you can also leverage a big element of EU funding that we tend to forget about when we talk about innovation, which are regional funds. Regional funds about 2 or 3 times more money in regional funds than innovation. And here you can use both innovation funding from the EU, regional funds, national public funds, and the regional and local government funds to do innovation in those cities.
Thank you. And now, keeping with the question around the public financial instruments, I'd like to turn to you again, Bettina, in terms of the KfW public bank perspective. So how can public financial investments actually help trigger in energy efficiency and affordable loans for homeowners, for example? Can you give us a bit of a concrete sense?
Yes, pleasure. So I will answer this question also from the perspective of KfW as an institution offering promotional support for home renovation, energy efficiency home renovation. So the first element is customer orientation. I think it's important that the successful promotional scheme has a setup and design suitable to address the different needs of the customer groups involved in the renovation market, distinguishing between private customers, commercial customers, and public customers. So this is the first thing to be taken into account. The second one is making sure that there is an easy access to the promotional program products. So easy access meaning the prejudice or the attitude of customers thinking that it's complicated to access promotional money has to be removed. And it's very important to make use of digitalization to the maximum extent possible and establish platform technologies to address the changing needs and a taste of private and commercial customers. Third factor I would like to mention is, again, awareness. Create awareness in the marketplace regarding the availability of the promotional and public financial instruments, and make sure that there is a system of support in terms of product development, in terms of technical assistance for the different customer groups, enabling them to take an investment decision and implement the measures successfully. So at KfW, we have very good experience with this element. We have established a network or a pool of energy experts which on a mandatory basis have to be involved in the promotional loan and grant application. And this expert also has to sign up after implementation of the energy efficiency measure that they have been in line, not only with the promotional conditions, but that they are technically okay and to the expected standard. Last but not least, it's the attractiveness of the promotional scheme, so of the public financial instruments, which has to really wake up the consumers and motivate them to invest a little bit more money into energy efficiency. Attractiveness meaning not just giving a small interest rate reduction, but a generous grant element as well. So,
okay. Thank you very much for that. Now, turning back to Barry, you've already mentioned the metering of energy efficiency in the same way as metering energy production, potentially being a way of stimulating some kind of paradigm shift. Do you want to elaborate a little bit further on that in terms of the attraction element there that Bettina has just been talking about as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that energy efficiency has always failed to be able to do is offer hard numbers to its customers on what we can actually deliver, right? We say that we hope we'll have this change, that we might have this change, but actually is quite unattractive. But I think energy efficiency also more generally, we have to be honest, particularly in the building sector, is highly unattractive, right? It is some group of people coming to your house to disturb your house. They then might leave it better or worse. The return on investment is unknown. The return on investment is calculated to be 20 years. You might have left the home, you might have died, you might have, many things could have happened in that 20 years. And you're told that you'll be not worse off if everything works out. It's not a great offer, right? And if we'd done the same for solar, if we'd done the same for wind, we wouldn't have had the transformation that we saw. So we have to see a new transformation. And that's why we have to start looking at ways to what they call value stack. And you say, okay, well, if I'm going to improve air quality, if I'm going to improve climate change, if I'm going to improve energy system dynamics because we need less energy peakers because we don't have as much energy demand as we expected, particularly if we're going to transition heating to electric, then we need to find a way of combining that like we did for renewables into a feed-out tariff, or rather than a feed-in tariff, a feed-out tariff, or something which creates companies whose only interest is to make it happen, right? Because in that kind of unsexy world, you need people who really want to make that happen. And someone once said to me, the way I make my kids do things, I offer them ice cream. The way that you make companies do things is you offer them profit, right? You give them a profit opportunity. And I think what we've tried to do is say we need absolutely an innovation where you offer energy efficiency, the same kind of support that you offer the traditional energy companies, so they can knock on people's doors and they can make the same kind of offers where they say, we'll renovate your house for free, and the feed-out tariff will pay us. So you'll get those savings day one. You have to make it more attractive, and you have to create a different thing. And the only way you can do that we thought, was to be able to give the same level of precision on the efficiency side as you have on the power side. So you can start using power savings agreements rather than power purchasing agreements. And with that, I think we could be absolutely transformational, because we create a completely new dynamic where also the company's job will be to deliver performance at the cheapest kilowatt saved possible. So you'll also get massive innovation in terms of total cost, like we saw in solar, like we saw in wind, because the companies for the first time will be interested in delivering the biggest outcome at the lowest cost, which is not what happens in renovation. It's more expensive to renovate your house today than 20 years ago. If that was the case for solar, we wouldn't have the revolution we're seeing, right? And the reason is because the current policy framework only stimulates measures going into houses, not solutions per kilowatt saved. So you need innovation. We think we've brought technological innovation that can completely change it, but we need policymakers to come along the ride with us.
Okay, and picking up on that sense of the public response that might be met to metering, I know it has brought up some interesting issues in terms of citizen engagement to date, and I'd like to turn to you, Adel, to ask how, in your opinion, can we best actually engage citizens in the deployment of innovation in order to overcome some of these barriers?
Okay, thank you. I think the smart metering is a very interesting case to understand the citizens of consumer behavior. Just to have an idea, in Europe, and this is a GRC study, you have 16 of the member states who are intended to have a market penetration of smart meters of above 80%. By 2020, and this would represent approximately 75% of the consumers being equipped with electricity smart meters and 40% for gas smart meters. That's in a nutshell. Now, the whole question is, how do you get from introducing technology to have a real impact in terms of net emissions cut? And 2 points, basically. First of all, and I think we've touched upon that already many times, I think we have a huge misjudgment in the concept of behavioral sciences. We have spoken for so long about consumer acceptance. And of course, we know this is important. And if we look at the different introduction of smart meters, there are some experiences which are close to catastrophe. And if I turn to my French friends and colleagues, the Linky smart meter was really very controversial, up to the point that there were court rulings allowing citizens to legally refuse installation of the smart meters. And just for the information, this is about concerns about data privacy, management, and ownership, and it's about also concerns, true or false, about health, electromagnetic impact. That's just for the history. But the whole point is that we've focusing on customer acceptance. And the whole issue is about customer adoption or appropriation. This is absolutely essential. And I think this is very far away from acceptance. It's about how people not only passively accept technology, but how they really actually spontaneously integrate the technology in their active usage and change their own lifestyle. And I think this really is about three things. It's first of all about really understanding and capturing the purpose of the technology. If you don't understand the purpose of the technology, there's no reason why you would invest time in using it. Of course, you need to understand how to use the technology. And afterwards, it's important to understand what's the benefit you identify in using the technology. And again, I think there is a huge misperception because we always think about benefit in terms of market signals. How many euros will I save using the technology? I think this is one element. But it's not the only element. I think a very important one is the ideological element. It's how the customer, by using technology, relate to what they do for the social good, for the good of the society as a whole. This is very fundamental, and we're not addressing that sufficiently, in my view. And I think in order to do that, we need to, again, invest massively in information, communication, and fundamentally in education. This is about to prepare the incoming generation on how they transform the lifestyle and the relationship to energy. And a last element, I think, which is quite important, which is often forgotten, is the rebound effect or the Jevons paradox. It's about what you do with the savings. And we know that many of us, with the savings, we invest in other activities which are climate adverse. The typical example is you buy a 5-star fridge, but the old fridge, you put it in the garage to keep your beer cool. With the energy savings, you have an unplanned or romantic city trip by plane. So we need to factor that in. And only if you really understand your relationship to energy in your behavior will we be able to cut emissions. So my main points are, first of all, that technology is indispensable, but it's just an enabler. This is really essential. And in ERA, we are focusing, of course, on technology, but 30% of our activity, our research activity, is about systemic change. And I think this is a very important point. It's not about technology, it's about how technology are used and interact together in a system-wise in order to generate or to cut the emissions. And within the systemic change, a fundamental element is social science and humanities. It's to understand how you drive behavioral changes and how the people relate to energy. So for me, the principal element is is not the ability to act on a technology, but the willingness to act. And this is very much about citizen appropriation, not about citizen acceptance or empowerment. And finally, as I said already, it's not only about market signals, it's about creating a pull effect. And if you look just at the smartphone, it was not just the availability of the technology and the price, because it was very expensive, it's the attractiveness of the different applications which made it a vast success. So you need to be attractive to the clients. To conclude, I think that the challenge is that we need to realize this transition, which is very much a cultural transition, in time scales which are in years, not in generations. And we've never achieved that in the past.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'm just very conscious of the time, but before we hand over to Monica for the conclusions, I just wonder, are there any questions in the room before we move on? Thank you. And just announce who you are and who you work for, please.
Paul McBrien, I'm co-pilot.
You might want to just grab the microphone out the arm.
Not better.
And my question is all about carrots. It's all about incentives, attraction, promotion. But maybe we just need a big stick. And am I naive to think that carbon tax could be that big stick that'd be so much better than carrots?
Who'd like to say that, Thomas?
Maybe two recommendations. One, which is both a carrot and a stick, and using actually science we have from behavioral economics and nudges. For instance, when choosing how to travel from place A to place B, let's say you want to go from Paris to Berlin, Paris to Amsterdam, you go on the website and you have different flights, etc. First, the one thing that could be proposed is to make sure that first we have also train options that are offered on the website. Some of them do provide both. And the second that you can add, which is both a stick and a carrot, is just a smiley. You just on the environmental impact. If it's, let's say, Paris, Amsterdam via train, you have a green smiley that smiles, with big smiley face. If it's a direct flight, you have a yellow smiley that has no smile at all. And if it's indirect flight via Frankfurt, for instance, which is the worst case scenario for the environment, you have a red smiley that doesn't smile. This actually can be very impactful. I mean, there is a whole company that was based on that in the US more than 10 years ago, Opower, and that was sold for hundreds of millions of US dollars in 2008, if I remember correctly. So those things won't make the system change, of course, but they will give information. Here you have both the carrot and the stick. Then when it comes to carbon prices, and I'm sure the others will respond, so I will talk about regulation. If you believe in innovation, you also must believe in regulation and setting the right regulatory framework. Currently, the problem we have is, let's say, is a problem of a waste. The kind of waste that we have is CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Back in the 70s, we also had a massive waste problem in Europe. People in Europe at the time were throwing garbage all over nature in lakes, in the countryside, etc. That was also the case in Switzerland. And at the time, to solve this waste problem, we did not create a waste price or a waste market where people could be paid for their waste and companies would buy their waste because waste is actually a resource. We set up a regulation, and this regulation started a whole bunch of innovation from public and private sector, and this is why, this created thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs to collect the garbage, recycle, limit also the amount of garbage in some instances, and use the garbage for other purposes, including heat production. So regulation is also very, very, very key when it comes to innovation.
Bettina, was it one of you wanted to comment on it as well?
No, I fully agree. I think, we were asked to prepare a small statement regarding the recipe to scale up energy efficiency investments in the building sector. And I thought about it, and I think the first and largest ingredient is an ambitious political framework. So this is the stick element. And however, which has to be combined with financially well-equipped promotional schemes and financial support, and generous financial support in particular for those investors who have no means to invest into their homes. This also has to go along with a tailor-made support structure for the different customer groups to make this work. I think it's the mixture, but the starting point is the ambitious political framework.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I suggest that we stay on the stage just to save some time, and then would you like to come and make the conclusions? I'm not sure. Is it you, Monica?
Should I go there?
I think that's probably simplest, and the microphone's already in place.
Now, I will not make conclusions because I don't think that this is actually an event that concludes the discussion. I think that there are many, many things that are open, and I want to really thank you because in this very room, some of you remember it, in 2011 we made, I think it was the first or one of the very first event about financing energy efficiency. Ingrid was there and also others, and there the key question was, do we need regulation to kick money? And there were all sorts of discussion around it, and I think that from that moment, the discussion really moved on. But still, we are not in a position, and I think that a lot of our speakers, in a way, said it, to be able to say we are in a change, in a completely changed model. We are not yet there, basically, not with energy efficiency and not with finance. But in relation to some time ago, I think that the main problem is not the amount of money, but it is the fact that money doesn't go where it should go. And I think that that is really something that is still an open question. But also, I think that there are some of the things that have been saying today on which we need to work, also as European Alliance to Save Energy with our partners, that really made tick on my mind, and one is the fact that we don't have to talk about barriers anymore. I liked very much what you said, Barry, I think that this question of insisting on the urgency and accelerating more than on the costs and barriers is something that will change the way in which we talk about things, because otherwise, if we talk about costs and barriers, we, in a way, which are there, of course, we, in a way, speak the same language of those who are against, basically, or those who are not convinced, or those who are not really on our side. And I think that that is something that we should probably underline it, but still do it in another way, just to say it. Another thing that I found particularly interesting is this question that innovation is not only about technology. And this goes back to the barrier issue and to the competition that we do have with fossils, and we do have with sectors which do not believe yet that energy efficiency can be really a change maker. Because every time we speak about technology, I always remember those who say we should not worry about climate change, we should not worry about what happens in society, because technology will solve it all. Well, technology will not solve it all. We also will of course, need some societal big changes and organization, because I think that that is something that it will not fall from the sky just for the sake of it, and some of your speakers really talked about it very much. Also, the relation between regulation and what do you regulate and with which numbers is something that is quite important, and the whole mysterious issue of taxonomy became very, very, very key in putting the money where it's needed, but also in putting in the relation the right regulation with the right numbers, with the right target, and the resources to actually make it happen. And another element which I think will need to be addressed in our discussion today over how to make the energy efficiency a really change-making element together with industry and together with politics at national and European level, is the fact that we have to put things in competition. For example, the KfW is still financing fossil fuels. Perhaps we have to motivate this public bank not to finance them anymore. And the same thing is happening with EIB, and the same thing is happening with a lot of other public-private banking or financial institutions, because it's of course true that in the moment in which you finance something fantastic from one hand, but you finance something not that fantastic from the other, you do create a contradiction also in policymakers, and you do create a contradiction also in consumers. So I think that all these elements are there for us to be taken into account in a different way than what we did 9 years ago, of course. But there is one element that is there exactly as 9 years ago. We are not yet there. And today we need to act much more urgently than before. And I think that some of the elements that were here today are, at least for the European Alliance to Save Energy, but I'm sure also for the people here, extremely interesting inputs also to make our offer, let's say, in the public discussion much wider than what was done before, because energy efficiency is one element of a bigger system, and we are all actors of that bigger system, so we better do it together. Thank you.